Hello everyone, welcome to the series of videos on web programming fundamentals. In previous videos, we see how HTML is used to structure the web pages. So HTML provided the fundamental structures of web pages. In this video, we will see how cascading style sheets actually apply the presentation style to the web pages. So HTML used to provide the structure of the documents or web pages, and then cascading style sheets is used to make the presentation style of the documents. So in principle, cascading style sheet is actually the language, style sheet language that describes the presentation of web documents. So the presentation style, it can be, for example, color of the content, it can be the fonts, it can be the position of the elements in the web pages. So everything that is visual can be controlled with the cascading style sheets. So the basic syntax of a cascading style sheet of CSS is a rule set, or simply said, just the rule. So the format of the rule is one we see here. First we have the selector, and then we have the body in the curly brackets. So in these braces, we have some declarations as property and property value pairs. So this is the fundamental structure of the rule set, or the rule of the CSS. So let's see what it means by this. So a selector is basically something that is used to select the HTML elements for which we want to style or apply the styles to the elements. So selector will select a particular element or elements where the style, which is enclosed in the curly braces, is applied to. So these braces is actually the body, or the embodies the styles which will be applied to the selected HTML element selected by the selector. And then we have these property and value pairs. So property is something for which to apply the style. So actually the property to style, and then the value is the value for the style. So whatever style we want to choose is the property, and then we provide the value for that property's style. So for example, let's say we have some specific property. So this property should be separated, its value should be separated with the colon. So the whole thing, the property and the property value, is called the CSS declaration, and each CSS declaration should be terminated with the semicolon. So the simple rule is actually the list of these CSS declarations, or more specifically the property and property values. So an example for the rule set is we have one rule set where we have the selector as h1. So what it means is that whichever style is present in the curly brackets will be applied to the headings, or the first level headings in the document. So here we have the property as color, and its value is red. So the red will be applied to the to the font face of every heading, level 1 heading in the page. So for example, we see here we have a first heading and second heading, so two headings here. So each heading has the color red because we have the selector as h1. So it will select h1 elements and then apply the property value of color as red. So how does actually the HTML fit into the CSS page, into the HTML pages? So basically there are three ways we can embed or apply the CSS to the HTML elements. So these are inline, internal, and external. So let's see briefly what it means. By inline CSS, it means the CSS is applied to a single HTML element. So basically, that's why it is included within the element tag itself with the style property of the style attribute of the element. Second, we have the internal CSS. So this is applied to the single page only as opposed to the single element. So there can be multiple elements rendered with this internal style sheet. So it applies to a single page and it is included into the style tag. And then finally we have the external CSS. So this is actually the external CSS file, and this can be applied to multiple HTML pages. So basically this is linked with the external CSS file is linked with the link tag. So let's see the example. So for example, here we have the inline CSS. So h1 here. So its style property is used, and then the value for the style property is the is the CSS, actual CSS, and the property is color and the value is red. So there can be several property value pairs applied into this. It can be represented in this, and these list of declarations or the property value pairs will be applied to heading 1. Here we only have one, the color and its value as a red. So only the h1 will have the color as red. So for example, in the page 1 we have two headings. The second heading, also a heading, has not color as a red, because we only have the inline internal inline CSS which is embedded in the h1 element. Next we have internal CSS. So what it means by the internal CSS, it is actually the internal to the page itself. So for example, here we have page 1 here, and in the page 1 we have the style tag, and in the style tag we have the CSS. So here we have h1 as a selector and the color as a property, and the red as a value for the property. So we see that in the page 1 there are two headings, and each heading has color red, as opposed in the page 2. For example, we have the page 2 and there are also some headings in the page 2 level 1 headings, but it has no color as a red, because the source code of the page 2 on the right side, it does not have any CSS. So the internal CSS which is present in page 1 cannot be applied to page 2. It will only be applied to page 1. So this is the internal style sheet. Lastly, we have external. So we can take the same example. So for example, if we want to render every heading in every page, so we can take this CSS out and save into a separate CSS file. For example, my style.css file. So we have one rule set here in the my style set file, and then we can link this CSS file into page 1 and into page 2 also. So we see that we have the link tag here with href as my style.css. So this is pointing to the CSS file, and the rel attribute, it tells that this link has is actually the style sheet. So we see this link tag is present in both page 1 and page 2, page 2 at the right side. So by this we see that page 1 and page 2, so each heading in page 1 and page 2 has the same style applied to, because it is external CSS that is linked to the all the pages here. So that's it. We have three types of CSS we can attach to the HTML pages by inline, actually embedding the styles into the particular element itself, and we can also have the internal style inside a particular page, and finally we can have a CSS file, and that can be applied to whichever pages there are, or how many pages we want to apply to. So then we can move to the selectors. So HTML selector, sorry, CSS selectors. We have 5 types of selectors. First, as we see in the example previously, we have the element selector. So element selector is actually applied by the tag name of the element. So for example, in the previous element, in the previous example, we see h1. So h1 is the tag, and then similarly h1 has was used as the selector. So the tag name can be used to select particular CSS HTML elements to apply the CSS style. Then we have the ID selector. So actually the ID selector is used as an pound sign and then ID, or the say identifier here. And then we have the class selector. This is actually the class is specified as the dot character and then the name of the class. So ID, the pound sign, and the name of the ID. The class is dot and the name of the class. And then we have some pseudo class selectors. So pseudo class selectors is actually the applied by the state in which the particular HTML element is. So we can apply the style to the HTML elements based on their state with the pseudo class selectors. Lastly, we have attribute selector. So we can actually apply the style, or we can select HTML elements based on particular attributes. For example, we can specify whether a particular element has a particular attribute set or not. So if a particular element has a particular attribute set, we can select that HTML elements. So let's see the examples. So first we have the element selectors. So here we see, for example, we have single selector P in the left side. So what it means is that it will select all the P elements. Similarly, we can apply the same style to multiple elements by specifying list of selectors. So in the example, we have h1 comma h2 and comma p. So what it means that every h1 h2 and p elements will be applied these styles. So here we have selectors separated by comma. So comma means and. It means apply style to all these h1 and h2 and hp. And then we have the descendant combinator. So here we can apply the style based on the position of or the location of the particular element inside the page. So for example, we have PEM. What it means that the style will be applied to all the EM elements which are actually within the P element. So here P and EM are separated with the space. So space here means within. So we can read from the backwards. It means that we want to apply the style to EM elements which are within P elements. So we can have multiple descendant combinators. For example, we can apply the style to EM which are inside the strong, which are inside the P elements, something like this. And then we have adjacent sibling combinator. So this is actually indicated by the plus sign. So here we have h1 plus p. So what it means that we want to apply the style to the first paragraph that comes after the h1 elements. So all the so one paragraph that comes directly after one h1 heading, the style will be applied to that paragraph. So as an example, we can see we have the ID selector. Here the ID selector, for example, we can specify the ID with the pound sign. So usually there is only a unique ID per element. So what it means, what it implies is that we can apply the style our ID selector to only a single element, because in principle uh, every element should have a unique identifier or ID. So this can be applied to only single element, and it will select a particular element which have the ID as main, here in this example as we see. Next, we can see the class selector. So basically, the class selector is a group of elements, or we can say is the category where multiple elements can belong to the same class. So multiple elements can have the same class name. So here we see that we have the P and then dot and then lead. So what it means that this style will be applied to the element which has the class lead, and the element can only be the paragraph elements because we specify the P. So for example, if there is h1 element and it has the class lead, this style will not be applied to the h1 elements. It will only be applied to the paragraph elements which have the class lead. On the right side we have the important class, so dot important. So what it means that any element which has the class name as important, this style will be applied to it. So this important class will select all the HTML elements whose class property or class attribute has the name as important. Next, we see the pseudo selectors or pseudo class selectors. So here actually the pseudo class selector is the state of the element. So this style will be applied only when particular element enters into a particular state. So for example, hover state is something when the user hovers over a particular element. In case the mouse pointer is over something, so this element will enter into the hover state. So here for example on the left side we have p colon hover. So note the class is specified with the dot, and then the pseudo class selector is specified with the colon. So colon hover, it means that the style will be applied to the paragraph elements only when the paragraph element is in the hover state, that is the user is hovering over the paragraph. Similarly, there is a colon visited on the right side. So it means that this style will be applied to the link, because a is the link. So this style will be applied to the link which has been visited, i.e. user has clicked on the link. So in the previous example we saw that the you should have observed that whenever we click on the link, its color changes from the default blue to the I think some other color. So this indicates that this link has been visited. Finally, we have the attribute selector. So attribute selector, it means that the style should be applied to the element when its particular attribute has been set. So as an example, for example, we have the p and the brackets, and then we have the class. So it means that this style should be applied to the all paragraph elements whose class attribute has been specified. Similarly, on the right side, we have the input and the bracket value. So it means that this style should be applied, or all the input elements should be selected whose value attribute is set. And then finally, we can see some text styling attributes. So first we will talk about the fonts. So basically there are 5 basic fonts in CSS. So CSS defines 5 types of fonts. We have the serif fonts. So serif is actually the edge. We see there are edges on the fonts. For example, this serif font has some edges. So this serif is the is the pointed edge on the edges of the on the letters. So this is called the serif. So serif fonts have edges. Similarly, sans is Latin word which means without. So without serif, sans serif means without serif. So the fonts which do not have any edges, for example, Arial font is sans serif font because it has no edges. And then we have the monospace fonts. So here all the letters have the same width. For example, we can compare the width of the I and M is the same. Whereas in the other fonts, for example, in the sans serif, we see that without, where W and I have different lengths. So W is has the wider length than the I. But in the monospace, W, I, and M will have the same width. This is usually used for the source code in the source editors. Finally, we have some decorative text like cursive, which is similar to the handwriting, and the fantasy fonts, which have some decorations. So we will mostly see these serif, sans serif, and monospace fonts in the web pages. Then we have some web safe fonts. So what it means by web safe fonts is that these fonts are generally available across all the systems or all the devices, whether it's Android or Windows, Linux, Mac. So these fonts should be available by default in every system. So these fonts are, for example, Arial, Courier, New, Times New Roman, Georgia, Verdana, Helvetica. These fonts are usually available on all the systems. So we can safely use these fonts. If we want to use a particular fonts which is not available, then we have to provide the font file to the browser also. But usually if we use these fonts, these are safe to assume that these will be available. Now we can move to the font properties. So first we have the font family property. So this can be used to specify the fonts for the text. So for example, we have the font family as a property, and then we have the value, which is actually the comma separated list of the fonts. So in this particular example, we have the Helvetica as the value, comma Arial, comma serif. So the interpretation of this value is that the first browser will try to find the Helvetica font to apply to the text. In case the browser cannot find the Helvetica text, Helvetica font, it should then find the Arial font. In case it cannot find the Arial font also, then the choice is it should find any sans serif font and apply to it. So this is actually the priority list of fonts that we want to apply. So first Helvetica, if no Helvetica then Arial, if no Arial then sans serif, any sans serif font. Similarly, then we have the property for the size of the fonts. So as the font size, so for example here we have the font size and then 24 px. So px is the pixels. So here we want to set the font size of the text as 24 pixels high. Then we have the font style property. So for font style property, usually have these three values. For example, normal is the normal text, italic is the italic font version. So for example, if we see font file, there is also the italic version of the font. So this if we use the italic value for the font style, so the italic version of the font will be applied. And then we have the oblique value. So oblique is almost similar to the italic. So it is actually the simulated version of the italic font version. In case there is no italic font version in the font, so it will be simulated by just slanting the text, i.e. applying the geometric transformation. So italic and oblique is usually the same. The difference is just in the italic font version of will be used, and in the oblique only the geometric transformation will be applied. And then we have the font weight property. So usually we will not be using all these properties, lighter, normal, or bolder. Mostly we use the bold property. So this is actually this font weight property indicates how much the font is bold. And then we have the text transform property. So we can actually transform the text into multiple styles. For example, if we use the none property, so it means we do not want to transform the text. If we use the uppercase property, uppercase value for the text transform property, so the text becomes all capital, so every text will be capitalized, every letter will be capitalized. For the lowercase, so every letter will be in the lowercase. For the capitalized property, the first letter of every word will always be the capital. And then we have the full width. This means the text is similar to a monospace font. Then we have this text decoration property. So for the none value, the no decoration is applied. If the value underline is used, the text will be underlined. Line through, it means the line strike through line will be applied to the text. And then we have the overline, which means the as compared to the underline, the line will be over the text. Note that we can use all these properties for the text decoration. So text decoration can be underline, line through, overline at the same time. So we can apply these values, but mostly we will be applying only a single value as the use case. Then we have the text align property, and there are several values. For example, the left, it means the text will be left justified. For the right value, the text will be right justified. And for the center, the text will be center aligned. And finally, we have the justify property, which means all lines of the text will be of the same width. Similarly, we have the line height property, letter spacing, and word spacing properties. So line height is how much the lines in a paragraph or something are away from each other, or what is the distance between the lines. And the letter spacing is actually the distance between the letters in the word, and the word spacing is the distance between the words in the paragraph or the sentence. So that's quite for the slides. So we can actually move to the practical part. I think I should end this video, and then for the practical part we should have the separate video. So we will just stop the this video here with the brief explanation of the style sheets, and then in the next video we will perform some practical or we will make our hands dirty with the CSS, and we will apply CSS into the HTML documents in the practical manner. So thank you for watching, and please keep watching, and please also comment how you find these videos, how helpful these are, and you can always provide suggestions and comments for the improvement of the videos. So thank you.